Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Are you going to be able to handle this? Or can you do it? Put her in there. Okay, put her in there. How's that? All right. I turn it over to you.
Thank you. For a minute there, I thought that I would never get on. I'm John ACKERLUND, an alcoholic.
Hi, John.
And I am enthusiastic about this program. I'm very grateful for this way of life. It's terrific. And I'd like to thank you all for the invitation. Larry, it's been special. And the rest of the committee, the hospitality here. And Mark, we had the best piece of pie Friday night. And, this has really been, this whole weekend has been really a loving, it's a love affair. And this is supposed to be the spiritual meeting. And I don't think there's anything in this program that isn't spiritual. It's all spiritual. Right and wrong, good or bad, because it's part of our journey. But I sat here on Friday night and listened to Perry Mason. When he talked about leg irons and handcuffs and in the courtroom, and you realize how he loved it. I love your enthusiasm, and I know you're helping a lot of people. And it has been like this the whole week. And Sharon Thornton in Al-Anon, I was at her wedding, and Dick and she got married. We are old friends. John here and Mac and Don, we kind of grew up in Alcoholics Anonymous together. They are very special in my life. But besides that, I have a lot of friends in this room that I love very much. And you have never seen me before. In a very short while, you will know me very intimately. And that's just a special thing that happens to us in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we can know each other on that level. And I am 53 years, 5 months, and 13 days sober this morning. And my wife, Karen, I met her in Stockholm during the war, and she was 17 years old. And this Christmas, she goes to Elsa Chamberlain's Al-Anon meeting on Monday noon. That's a meeting that 48 years old, and Karen had her 43rd birthday. And The first time she talked about it's my birthday. And I was trying to be funny, and I said to her, how do you count your birthday in Al-Anon? First day you come in or when you surrendered? And she just looked at me and smiled and said, no, we counted from the first time we kicked you son of a bitches out of the house. So she's still winning. We have 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy, and they were 6 and 8 and 10 and 13 years old when I came in. And our youngest daughter, Katrina, she's one of us. And last July, the 28th, she had 21 years of sobriety. And John Eric was 6 years old when I came in, and the last 4 years when he went through Laguna Beach High School, he was stoned every night from 8 to midnight. He sat up there on top of the world and smoked pot and coke and took drugs and looked in a mirror. And in May last year, he had over 30 years of being clean. He's not an alcoholic, but he was a drug addict. And he had a friend to my Wednesday night meeting in Laguna that had a 502, and then this young man, he stood up and said, I'm Jerry, and I'm an alcoholic. And my son stood up and said, well, my name is John Eric, and I'm a dope fiend. And he hasn't had a drunk since, so that over 30 years. He was a carpenter for 21 years, and now he's been a general contractor for the last 7 years, and he builds homes down there on Newport Coast and Pelican Point, and he built one house for $4 million and one for $14 million. And he's a fantastic, really a gentleman and terrific to his mother. And I'm so proud and grateful for them. But it's hard for us parents when the kids get in trouble. And Karen said to me when they started getting trouble that, Johnny, you and I have to get out of the way. And we have to give them the right to be right and the right to be wrong, and we cannot interfere in God's timetable. And we have to allow them to make some mistakes and hang themselves, because we cannot promote this thing. You didn't come in here until it was absolutely necessary. And thank God for his good wisdom in Al-Anon, and I was able to get out of the way, and so we are a most fortunate family. I was here in this long sobriety. For 12 years I was in this institutional committee, and I had three things a week. I gone to prisons and jails and honor farms and road camps and alcoholics ward and judges' chambers. And I did that for 12 years, 3 times a week. And Karen and I, not by our own choice, but we were asked to talk a lot. So 25 years we were circuit speakers. 26 to 30 weekends a year we were out of state, out of country. And when I became 80 years old, we decided that, to go up on 5 o'clock on Friday morning and be in airports from 6 to 8 hours every Friday and every Sunday, and come home Sunday night, and I went to work on Monday morning. And, and it has been quite a deal. But many of you can say, geez, I drove 30,000 miles a year for Alcoholics Anonymous and 30,000 miles a year in my own business. And many people can say that, were you hiding out in AA? Well, I tell you something. When I went to my meeting, 8:30 to 10, I went to 7 meetings a week the first year. I've gone to 5 meetings every week, 5 meetings a week ever since. And you know, when 8:30 to 10, the kids had done their homework and were ready to go to bed, and I went to my meeting. And on weekends, they wanted to be there with our friends, so didn't interfere there. And I just like to assure you something, that many of us sit here and look at, you can't be that busy in AA, you know, and so on. And what about the family? You know, they were 6 and 8 and 10 and 13 when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I have my office at home. I swam with them every day. I played tennis with them 3 times a week. They had our own horse for 12 years. I taught them either English and a little dressage and a little jumping and taking care of that horse for 12 years. I really lived my youth with those kids. And I can rest assure you, I have lived more normal than normal people do. The only thing I'm aware of it, you know, we can have a terrific life in Alcoholics Anonymous and do what we are supposed to do here to give away what we got. Forever grateful. You know, I lived in Laguna Beach for 35 years, and 25 years of those I lived next to Chuck Chamberlain and El Sound. And we lived in a wonderful environment when it come to this program. And, you know, I'm 84 years old. I work full time. I'm in the building business. I've been in it for 48 years. And I deal with the developers, and they don't seem to mind my age group. And I love to get a paycheck. You know, me and God and broke is a real drag. I'm really more spiritual when I have money. And 4 years ago, Karen and I, we had to leave our beautiful home down the hill in Laguna, and we bought a little condominium in Laguna Woods. It's 4 miles inland. You know, that's something else, you know. I mean, my age group. And, you know, we bought this beautiful little condo with 2 bedrooms and 2 full bathrooms and a 30-foot living room and a 30-foot balcony looking out over a creek. And I'm 84 years old, and I have a 30-year loan. And the guy who approved the loan, if you take an honest inventory, you would realize that optimism is one of his defects of character. You know, I have to get into this thing. You know, I come into these rooms these days, and there's always some old timers that say, "Oh, him again," you know, and it happens. You know. A bunch of years ago, I was invited to Flagstaff to talk, and the guy who invited me was old like myself. And I asked him, I said, "You know, you invited me here 7 years ago, 11 years ago, 19 years ago, and 27 years ago. Why do you invite me again?" He said, "I wanted to hear you one more time before you die." You know? It was funny then. Somebody said to me this morning, "God, you are really handsome." I said, "Well, if I wasn't handsome now, it would be too late." You know. Besides that, I'm probably the most famous substitute speaker on the West Coast. That happened long ago. You know that sometimes the circus speakers are invited to 2 different locations the same weekend. And 38 years ago, Dr. Paul, you call him, God rest his soul, he was only a year sober, but he was already a circuit speaker. And he was invited to Vancouver, Canada, and to Hawaii the same week, and his wife, Max, God rest her soul, she wanted to go to Hawaii. So they said, why don't we send John to Vancouver? So that was my first big deal. Guy named Corky Burke picked me up at the airport, and we drove to the hotel. There was 4,500 people at that conference. It was a big deal. We were standing there in the lobby in the Friday afternoon, and everybody milling around, and this lady came up to Corky and said, hi, how are you? And he said, I'm really good, how are you? And she said, you don't really remember me, do you? He said, sure, honey, but I'm rather busy with this gentleman right now, so she left. And I said, Corky, she wanted to talk to you. You don't have to babysit me. Everybody are friendly. Go and talk to her. He left, came back 10 minutes later, said, that's goddamnest thing. I said, what happened? He said, I came over there and said, how are you? And she said, you don't remember me, do you? He said, sure, honey, what meeting did I meet you at? She said, for God's sake, man, I was your second wife, you know. A little bit of a blackout, I suppose. You know, for the record, my grandfather died from alcoholic delirium in 1910. He lived in a 2,000-acre place outside Stockholm, and they were breeding racehorses, but he died from alcoholic delirium. My father had a problem with his liver in 1927, and nobody knew anything about this illness then. He was a giant of a man. He radiated vitality. Women adored him. Men envied him, but he died 3 years later. And he only weighed 130 pounds when he died, and he didn't want to die at all, and he didn't have much of a chance. I was 8 years old then. And I tell you, it's something to see, a beautiful human being like he once was. He was 6'2", and when he touched you, you realized his strength. But in 3 years, he had deteriorated absolutely nothingness. My father was an aristocrat. He was vain and proud and arrogant, but he was also a very loving person. But I wasn't violent. And thanks to our program, I've been able to deal with that. 99 out of 100 meetings I go to, we finish with the Lord's Prayer. And there's a line that says, forgiven as I forgive those who trespass against me. And I assure you that there was stuff in my inventory that I wish I could be forgiven about. Then we can't have two standards here. I'm supposed to be forgiven. I'm supposed to have an opportunity for new life. But anybody that did something to me, justice for them or whatever you want to call it, it's an important point. Because if we don't address this issue, we will come in as victims and we will remain victims. And it will interfere in our own recovery, and that's why I bring it up. My older brother didn't have much of a chance for another reason. He had a little bit of pride, and it seemed to be a commodity. We can't afford a luxury in this outfit. More than 20 years ago now, he lived in a castle outside Stockholm, married to a very beautiful girl. In fact, he married my girlfriend. I had a little bit of problem with that for a while, but no, I'm glad he did, you know. But he drank like I drank, and he blew it all. For 18 years, he defended his right to drink. You know, this guy, he was graduated from 3 universities, spoke 6 languages fluently, carried a Swedish flag in the Olympics on 3 occasions. He was in gymnastics and water polo. You know, 6'4" in gymnastics. Can you believe it? You know, but he drank and chased around, and his wife finally got tired of it and divorced him. The last 18 years of his life, he lived in a room that cost $15 a month to live in, drank a fifth of whiskey every night, and just lived in the past, and there was never ever anything wrong with him. I tried to 12-step him a few times. We had some similarities. But I wrote him a letter, a page and a half, what I used to be like, and 3.5 pages about all the wonders that has happened to me since I joined the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a postcard back. He said, "Dear John, I'm sorry to hear about all your problems." So much for identification. I flew to Stockholm in 1978 and spent a couple of weeks with him, and we sat down in that little cubbyhole. There was a 2-foot closet and a steel bunk bed and a little window. And that's all he had in that room. And I said, why don't you go to work again and do something? You have all these qualifications. He said, she ain't going to get a dime from me. He had a nerve to divorce me. I said, she still lives in the castle, and you have lived in this room for 14 years. I said, who is the one that is the prisoner? He said, you don't even understand. I'm a very humble person. I mean, talk about arrogance, So he was. I invited him out here. He was here with me for a month. I took him to AA meetings. He met all our friends down in Laguna Beach and Monarch Beach in that area, and it's a fantastic crowd. And one night after the Wednesday night meeting with Lynn Wilder, he said, why don't you come home to me and have a little party after the meeting? And that was over 100 people came to his home, the beautiful home where he and Pam lived at the time. My brother was there, and Lynn gave him a tall glass of scotch, and he stood there for about 3-4 hours. There was about 20 young women in AA, 26 to 32 years old. They were fascinated by this guy. He was dark and mysterious, handsome, 6'4". They were up there rubbing up against me, and he had a wonderful time. He just stood down, drank, and had a great time. And the night before he should go back to Sweden, I said, what do you think about this? He said, you don't understand, I don't want to quit. It's the only thing that's real in my life. When I sit down by myself and drink and think about when I was on top of everything, and I say, I understand. He flew home the next day. He died 11 months later from yellow anders. My younger brother had gone to Scripps in La Jolla twice, 30 years ago. They told him 30 years ago that his liver was shot. He can't drink no more. He's still drinking. Sometimes you and I wonder what's wrong with people like my brothers. There's really nothing wrong with them. Alcohol did something for my older brother to the day he died. It's still doing for my younger brother. That's the illness of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's why I can say to you, you and I are the lucky ones because of the evidences in these rooms. All the stories here. There ain't no way that we can come from that point to this point. It's all by the gift of God. Don't kid yourself. It's a fabulous thing. I didn't start to drink until I was 31 years old. Karen and I, we came here to this country in 1948. And, it was right after the war. I was very wealthy in Sweden. I had no dollars. And we came to this country. We had $815 to start a new life. Wherever you should, and all the veterans were coming home. You couldn't get a job, but there was a government contract. You had to be a citizen. It took 5 years to be a citizen. I pumped gas in Beverly Hills for 3 years. I managed a big station there on Beverly Drive and Beverly Hills between Wilshire and Santa Monica Boulevard, and that's how I started out here. And then a few years later, I was employed by this door factory in Alhambra. My boss was alcoholic, and he wanted to have somebody to drink with. I was the first guy that manufactured pre-hung door openings. It was back in the 50s. So I started to drink. I never drank before. When my father died, I promised my grandmother I was never going to drink, so I didn't drink. 1952, I started to drink. And the funniest thing happened. From day one, I drank a fifth of booze a day. For 2 years, I was never drunk, never hungover. I just felt good. I needed a drink long before I started to drink. I grew up with a lot of sorrows. My dad died when I was 8. My mother died before I before I started to drink. A little sister of mine died when I was 5, and you know, and I really had problems when I grew up. Well, I tell you, the first 2 years, it was fantastic to drink alcohol. And, you know, I drank around the clock, you know, and I had a ball. You know, a year later, I'd sold so many doors they couldn't pay. You know, they gave me 1/3 of the stock of the company. And here I am, just in a few years in America, and I own part of 1/3 of a door factory. And, you know, I'll tell you what, you know, I worked all day, came home about 4 o'clock and filled up a bathtub of hot water, mixed myself a big jig of dry martinis. I slid in the tub down, lit a candle and inhaled, you know, and drank that martini and spit it out, the pimento, you know. And I said, lay down in that tub, right? Oh boy, this is really class, you know. Jesus Christ, you know. And you know, I drank around the clock. One time I was invited to go up and say, Chappelle and SS Construction. It was the biggest home builder in Southern California. Came to their main office on Wilshire Boulevard, and I gave him a bid on those pre-hung door openings, and Mr. Chappelle sat up behind his 30-foot desk, you know, and I said, and he said, this is a very interesting concept. And I said, Mr. Chappelle, I said, I think that we should stick together, you know. He said, you know, I really didn't know that you were Jewish. I said, right now I am, you know. And he just laughed and signed a $300,000 contract, said, get the hell out of here, give me good service, you know. It was a joke, you know. Then the 3rd year I started to drink, you know, my wife started to run out of humor. In the last 7 years I drank, it was a daily deal. She was trying to prove I was alcoholic, and I tried to prove to her I was not. You know, and her father was alcoholic, and she had decided to never have anything to do with somebody to drink, you know. And I didn't drink when we met. Anyhow, she said, you know, if you don't stop drinking, I go back to Sweden. I said, please, Karen, don't do this. You have no idea how well I'm doing. And then she came a little later on and said, you know, if you don't stop drinking, you have to move out. So then I stopped drinking. And the next phenomenon about that is when I hadn't had a drink for 2 weeks, and things were worse. We were still screaming and hollering at each other. I said, it ain't the booze. You know, look, I haven't had a drink for 2 weeks, and you're still screaming and hollering at me, you know. We just don't get along anymore. You know. And then I took a drink, and I said, why have I denied myself this pleasure for so long? It's crazy. It's not alcohol. And the next phenomenon is what started to happen to me when I stopped drinking and had those ultimatums. I started to shake. I can't go into my customers. I work full time. So then I discovered I took 2 double shots of whiskey. Stopped the shakes. I was steady as a rock. I would work all day. So now I had to con myself out why I had to have a couple of drinks all the time. And so on and on and on that went. The next phenomena was when I stopped drinking. It was at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I sat straight up in my bed and looked in front of me, and this big white snake came out of the wall. You know, I never saw anything like it in my life, you know. It came right out of the wall. He was snow white, had 3 black eyes. He was 23 feet long. And he came slowly across the room, stopped in front of my face, and started to hiss at me. I could even smell him. It smelled like peraldehyde. It smelled like death. And I sat down and said to myself, you know, I haven't had a drink for 3 days, so it can't be the booze. Yeah. Anybody here had little hallucinations? Are you all a bunch of high-bottom drunks in this room this morning? Okay. You know, my experience with that snake was this, that the closer he came, the more I screamed. And the scream in my head, for my own screams, it reached such a crescendo, it was eventually my brain exploded for my own scream, and then I fell unconscious and fell backwards. That was my experience with it. Karen told me in the morning, she said something strange happened this morning around 4 o'clock. She said, you sat straight up, looked in front of you for quite a while, and then you said, ee. That's all it was, folks. The third time that happened, I said, this only happens when I stop drinking. I will never, ever stop drinking again. One morning, she almost had me. I woke up and my bed was wet. When I lay down, I thought, what can I say to this? And she was standing in front of the bed and looking at me with those little beady Allen on ice, you know. But that dialogue was fantastic. She stood down and she said, well? I said, well, what? I mean, what the hell can you say? I sure hope there's some bedwetters here this morning, you know. And that moment, our youngest daughter, Katrina, came in. And she said, Daddy, I'm so sorry, but last night when I climbed into bed with you, I believed I wet your bed. I mean, talk about a break for an alcoholic. You know. I smiled and I said, oh, my little darling, I said, a little squirt now and then won't hurt anybody. And you thought I was alcoholic. You know? And 4 days later, it wasn't Katrina's fault. One night I made love to her when she wasn't even there. And that's kind of tricky. She was actually laying 2 feet away from me there. And she said, what are you doing over there? I said, I beg your pardon? And when she realized what was going on, she started to laugh at me. I started to cry. I felt it was so humiliating to laugh at the guy who was doing his best. In the morning, I'd been out in the kitchen. I'd had my codeine cough medicine and my whiskey, and she met me in the hallway. And she said, well, good morning, lover boy. And I didn't feel any pain. I said, that's the best peace I've had in a long time, you know. Needless to say, I love the laughters in Alcoholics Anonymous. To me, that in itself is a spiritual experience. Anything that you and I, those tragedies, when we can laugh about those things, it makes it possible for us to forgive ourselves and change. And it's very much part of the recovery program for Alcoholics Anonymous, this laughter. It's the most healing thing there ever is. You know. And I just like to tell you one more episode and then I'll go into recovery. It was a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, Thrifty Mart in Anaheim. And I was picked up trying to steal a pint of liquor for $3.57. He says, I was drunk and unshaven. I weighed 246 pounds. I couldn't even defend myself. And I said, look what has happened to me. Look where I came from. You know, I was brought up in a beautiful family under the most favorable circumstances. That home in Sweden, you know, that we had a big rose garden. We had tennis court. We had 2 nurses that dressed and bathed us till we were 12 years old. It was gracious living. But I tell you, that morning in Anaheim, I looked exactly like a person who has to steal a pint of liquor to live. So it was. The next day, I came into one of my best accounts in Anaheim. They called Dykstra and Drake. They were apartment builders. And the secretary said, "Johnny, I saw you in the market yesterday." And let's face it, I'm glib. I didn't even bother. I just said a 4-letter word and walked out of there. You know, 2 days later, Karen came to me and said, "You know, and Johnny, for years, because of the children, we have stayed together. But now, because of them, we have to part. And either you go down and try that thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to walk, or you have to move out again." And I'd been moved out before. And, you know, I had tried a few things to get sober with other means before I came into AA. I went to a minister for counseling every week for an hour for 18 months, and I leveled with him. He said to me one time, "You have to ask God to help you." And I said, "Walter, you are a good man. I'm not. You don't talk to your wife the way I talk to mine in the evenings when she bugs me about my drink." And so God doesn't want anything to do with me. I've tried that stuff. And that gentleman, he read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find out how he could best help me. And he realized that him and I, we lacked identification, and that I had to find my bottom further down alone. He even suggested a program of alcoholics, and I had no idea what it meant. And so he had read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, so he said, "Well, I want you to go to the psychiatrist." So I went to a doctor that belonged to the same church, and I spent $2,000 with this doctor. There wasn't anything he said to me that Karen didn't tell me for free 3 times a day, you know. There wasn't anything he said to me either that wasn't the truth. Everything he was. I took my 4th and 5th step with him because I really needed help, wanted help. And he told me one day, he said, "You know, John, what's wrong with you?" And I said, "Tell me." And he told me it all my secrets and all my emotional problems. And I said, "Doctor, you're absolutely right. And that's why I drink. I can't stand myself the way I'm put together." And that's how that was. A lot of capable people in the field of alcoholism today. Well, I sure don't envy them, because they don't realize that you and I, we do not really want to quit. We like to come back to when it was fantastic for us, and that's the insanity. And that's why it goes on and on and on, this thing. Well, anyhow, so Karen said that, so about that ultimatum, I went down to the Ilona Club in Anaheim. I came in down, there was an old lady named Josephine behind the coffee bar, and she said, "Do you have a drinking problem?" I said, "No. I get along with it absolutely fabulous." I said, "Can you do something for my wife? She's crazy." And I tell you another thing, if I had known how sick I was when I came in, I would never have stayed. Stopping drinking wouldn't have fixed that. And what I'm talking about is this sanity and denial and so on. It is total denial that we all have. Well, the next day, it happened to me. I got up in the morning, went out in my kitchen and drank my codeine cough medicine so I wouldn't get sick, and calm my stomach down so I could drink some whiskey, and drove down to the Ilona Club and polished off a pint of Seagull 7. On the way down there, I came in down, I said, "Please call my wife and tell her I'm here already." And then I proceeded to tell these people why I couldn't be alcoholic. I said, "You know, I live in a beautiful home with a swimming pool. I have 3 automobiles and an English bulldog. I have a dapple gray Arabian horse parked down the block from where we live in Orange Grove, where I have 28 stalls, and that I ride every afternoon." And I said, "I play music, I fantasize a little bit, and that sure as hell cannot be alcoholism." And there was one guy said that son of a bitch will never make it, you know. And then I went out and had 4 double martinis for lunch, and came back after lunch, and I asked them, "Please call my wife and tell her I'm here for the second time to show her how sincere I was." And then it happened to me. And I'd like to assure you something. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was no success. I tried to be a good father. I knew I wasn't. I owed $36,000 for all small bills and all due. And Karen had had a suicide attempt 2 years before I came into AA. We were in Palm Springs one time to start over, and I fell in a restaurant, and it was a mess. And she thought I didn't love her anymore. She drank 100 aspirins and tried to commit suicide. And while trying to not drink and realize that I had broken her spirit, it bothered me very, very much. But I couldn't live without booze at the time. That's how it was when I came in. So anyhow, that afternoon when I stood there, there was this voice in the back of the club, and he said, and I'd like to show you this. I had done the best I knew all my life, and it still beat me in every area of my life. It's really how it is. Charlie Vick was his name. He became my sponsor. And he said, Johnny, why don't you come home with me and let us talk? I said, okay. You know, there's a pamphlet here called The Members' Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alan McInnes wrote it. He was a screenwriter. And he probably the finest pamphlet we have when it comes to what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about and what's going on in these rooms. Beautiful man. He had dinner in my home many times, and great friends. And he, among other things, says, the first miracle that happens in the meeting room of Alcoholics Anonymous is this: wherever you and I come in, they always point and say, you know what's wrong with you? The first miracle here is when a newcomer comes in, he said, you know what was wrong with me? And this is what I have done about it. When come in and have a cup of coffee or home, and we don't put them on the defensive. It's a beautiful thing. And Charlie Vick sat there in his patio and told me his story. And when he was through, I realized he was worse than I was. And he depended more than I did on it. And he was sober. I said, you really were like that and you don't have to drink no more? And he said, and I knew he was telling the truth, but I said, you know, you don't understand. When I stop drinking, I get the shakes. And weird things happen to me when I stop drinking. And he said, Johnny, you will only shake for 4 or 5 days. And then you never have to shake again as long as you live. And I didn't know that. And that was when I broke, and I said, please show me what to do. I was in a meeting that night, and when they read portion of chapter 5 that we heard this morning, I just said, please God help me today to stay sober. It wasn't a big deal. But you know, I thought a spiritual experience or something would be like, yes, John, what can I do for you? But it wasn't like that at all. But the very feeling there, you know. When I came home that night, I said to Karen, you know, I don't have to drink anymore. And she said, you know, your eyes look different. And I haven't had a drink since, you know. I drank 2 half pints of codeine cough medicine every day, 2 3/5 of whiskey every day, 6 Andersons 4 times a day. I was just weird, you know. I haven't had anything since. I had 10 days of sobriety. I said, came in a stag meeting, I said, you know, I feel so goddamn guilty. There was an old timer like Mac that said the reason you feel so guilty is because you're guilty. And then we have to accept that. And I realized that's true. But then it comes this, well, no matter what, I can't drink no more. There is something going on here. I had 2 weeks of sobriety. I came home from a meeting one night, and I lay down in my bed, and something is going on in these rooms. And it is. You know, I hope I know, it's still with me today. I get goosebumps when I think about it. Something going on in these rooms, and it does. I had 60 days of sobriety. You know, 60 days of sobriety, those days we usually said, hey, why don't you come home to me and have a cup of coffee after the meeting and a Coke? So I had 60 days, and I said, why don't you guys come home to me and have a cup of coffee and a Coke? So that about 14 guys came home to my home. Karen wasn't pleased at all. So we were there, and then what Bill said and what Mary said, and God damn it, what a fantastic meeting we had, Oh, wow. And then Karen came out with his cardboard box and put it on the living room table, and she said, "Yes, gentlemen, I know you're absolutely freaking terrific, but what are we going to do with these?" And that was all my bills. And one guy looked it through and he said, "Johnny, they can't kill you and they can't eat you." And I said, "Did you hear that?" And Charlie Vicky looked and he said, "Johnny, you got to go back to work." I said, "You mean without nothing?" I said, "I can't do it, Charlie." I was scared to death. Next morning at 8 o'clock, he's at my front door. "Come on, we are going." And you know what he did? He drove down to Dykstra and Drake's office, where that secretary was when I had been down when I was picked up trying to steal. And I hadn't even dared to tell Charlie yet about that episode, because I thought if he find out I'm a common thief, he probably will fire me, So he said, "Go in down and give them a bid." And I said, "Please." So I go in down. That was Helen. She sat behind her desk and looked disgusted, And I said, "May I give you a bid?" And he said, "Over there in the corner." And I went over there, frames, jams, doors, wardrobes, finished lumber, and I wrote it all down, And then I went over to her desk and I said, "Helen, thank you for letting me give you a bid." And the most unbelievable thing happened to her. Her face completely changed. And she said, "Oh my God, you are not drinking." I said, "Helen, I have 60 days. I said, "God bless you, John. I have a brother-in-law. He has 2 years on the program. You'll be fine." So then I came out of there, and Charlie sat in my car, and I said, I gave him a bid. So let's go down to the club and have a cup of coffee, So I stood down and had a coffee mug those days, and I said, "God damn," I said, "I gave them a bid." And Charlie said, "Let us do it again." So we made 2 calls in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the morning, 3. Charlie stayed with me for 90 days until I had enough courage to work on my own. Yeah, that's something else. I had 6 months of sobriety. Up early, go to work early. Karen meets me in the hallway, and she said, "Well, before you had the booze as a crutch. Now you have those goddamn meetings. Are you that kind of a weakling who can't stand on your own 2 feet?" And I said, "I suppose so." And then I go to work, and I work all day, and I come home at 5:15 to have a bite to eat before I go to my meeting. There was 25 phone calls about the people I owed the money to, and I had no money yet, no income. I couldn't write a check for $36,000. So I called my sponsor. I said, "Charlie, they want my money." And he said, "No, Johnny, they want their money." What I went on a budget, and I worked every day. I went to a meeting every day. I didn't drink every day. I bought money orders twice a month, and it took me 3.5 years to pay back that $36,000. And when I had paid back that $36,000, there was no resentment because I had bought my freedom. And those financial events was very important in my life. But that night I had a bite to eat. I went to my meeting, had a reprieve here for an hour and a half. And then I came home and said, "Thank God for my sobriety of that day." And I lay down in my bed and I said, "God, what a terrible day I have had. What an absolutely terrifying day I have had." And then I said, "Yeah, but I didn't drink." I said, what's going on? I used to get drunk over a lot less. And then it begins, because then we start to realize that this thing called sobriety, it's mine. It's my own. It's the only decent thing that has happened to me in a long time. It must be some sort of a gift or something. And then begins the consistency in our living, and then we add to it. And from now on, everything is God's business, good and bad. And if the bad stuff is part of God's business, if bad stuff is part of God's business, that's also fantastic, you know. So then we go into consistency in our living, and then we start to live better. You know, I had 15 months, and Charlie said, you have to take your inventory. And I was 90 days sober. I took an inventory. I took my wife's inventory and my older brother's. Came out pretty good. So I said to Charlie, it won't make any difference. It won't change a thing. And Charlie said, if you don't take your inventory, you ain't going to stay sober. So I said, I'm going to prove to you it won't work. So I wrote my inventory with that attitude. And then I called him and I said, you know, I've taken my inventory. Come down and we take the 5th step. So I came down to Charlie, and I read him. There was about a 50-minute inventory. And the strangest thing happened after I had read that to Charlie. I had a deep feeling that I had fulfilled the contract for sobriety, and I didn't have to worry about getting drunk. I had never counted on that. Another thing happened. I had a deep feeling that God had forgiven me for all those things that I took my loved ones through. I hadn't counted on that. It's a beautiful thing. If there's any of you that sit here and think about taking your inventory, I'll give you a little advice. First, write down the 4 things you have decided not to tell anybody, even as a severe torture. It will save you 62 pages of writing. We got to do it, otherwise we know it ain't complete. And usually I've listened to a lot of inventories over all these years, as much as any professional. And always there's 2 things that there is something in all of us, and it's a little bit something about sex and something about honesty. It's incredible. Well, so now that is out of the way. Then the next item I had to deal with was resentments, and that's #1 killer in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was this hate between my older brother and myself. He was only a year and 9 months older than I was, but he hated me with a passion I never realized why. When he was 12 years old, he was over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He was enormous. And I was, you know, and he used to knock me down, and I rolled under the dining table and tried to pretend that I'd faint so he wouldn't hit me anymore. I was no match for him. You know, he was 6'4", weighed over 200 pounds. And he had a photographic mind, and he was brilliant. And he used to tear me apart. I had no confidence in myself at all. He broke my total spirit. When I was 13 years old, he drowned me. I was out in the ocean in Sweden, and he was a water polo player, and he held me under till I heard my father's voice talking to me from the other side. And I tell you, it's a terrifying thing to drown. When you inhale and just get water on, you think your whole head is going to explode. And I hung there suspended, and I couldn't move a limb. And then he took me up on a sun deck, and I lay down. Why does he hate me so much? And now I sit there in Alcoholics Anonymous supposed to deal with my resentment. And I was told I had to forgive. I said, well, because I joined the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, is I'm supposed to be some sort of they can just walk all over me and I'm still going to say I love you, forgive you. There must be more to than that. And then it came to me. I sat down, prayed at night, and it was just like I saw a film. You know, when I was 3 years old and he was 5 years old, our Father favored me. You know, when I was 3 years old, I was absolutely adorable. And my brother was obese, and he was no lap baby, and I could see his eyes. What about me? And he was such a serious guy and such an introvert. And he needed more love than I did. And I realized that I was in the way. And then I thought, how can I set this straight? And then that night I sat down. My brother's total obsession all his life was to get the approval from our Father. He couldn't get it because he died when he was 9. When he became 12, 13 years old, a little older, he took gymnastics 4 times, every day for every day of the week he took gymnastics and became one of the finest athletes in Sweden, You know, can you realize 6'4" being in gymnastics? He was an officer or a gentleman. He lived in a castle outside of Sweden, had a beautiful wife with 4 kids. And I realized that's all he's interested, to get the approval from our Father. He couldn't get it because he died when he was 9. So I just wrote this little note to him. You know, I'll tell you what happened. I hadn't heard from him for 15 years. And the next day I got a letter from him, and paragraph for paragraph that I had thought about the night before, he had written down, remember, to glorify our Father's name because he was a great man, on and on and on. It was all those things I thought about, this obsession about the approval. So I just wrote this little note. I said, Dear Bertil, if our Father had been alive today, he would have taken you in his arms and said, you have succeeded in bringing on my greatest expectations, your loving brother John. I haven't had a resentment since. You know what happened when I dropped that letter in the mailbox? I lost my inferiority complex. And and realize now, I didn't play God. I didn't say I forgive you for drowning me. He maybe couldn't have handled that, and I said, step about except to do so within them and others. I just made amends to him how I had interfered in his life. And that's what it's all about, and then there's still a little dignity involved here, and self-respect. My brother, he wrote me every day from then on. Every month I got a letter from him, and we became friends before he died. But he died from this illness, It's an incredible thing. And then we have addicts, alcoholics today. And we have we don't talk about addicts here. And I'm just going to talk about what the difference between addiction and alcoholism is and make a point about it. People come in here, they are on heroin. They don't identify with the people on coke. The people on coke feel superior to alcoholics for one reason or another. Maybe the price tag have a little bit of snob appeal, I don't know. And they can say, if I only had a program like Alcoholics, Coke Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, I have a lot of credibility, help a lot of people. But what's wrong with us? Why is it only 9 out of 10 alcoholics? 1 out of 10 alcoholics that makes it. It's like Clancy said, my case is different. I'm not really an alcoholic like them. And it's a fact. And what is the difference? An addict, you want to get out of reality into oblivion. And you and I drink to fit into reality. But the recovery program is the same. Total abstinence and 12 steps and sponsorship. And I have watched you addicts for over 40 years now, and you don't seem to drink a hell of a lot better than we did. So join what you're supposed to join. You can't beat this rap. Now, my sobriety is right. My AA life is good. My work started to go better. The kids come home from school. Hi, Dad, can we talk? No, the kids are in place. Every day you and I stay sober, life is getting better in spite of us. And there have been days in my life, in my sobriety, the only thing that was right that day was that I didn't drink that day. It's worthwhile to fight for. Don't give up before the miracle happens. You know, then it took 3 years of sobriety before Karen realized I meant business. You know, I had been on the wagon several times those last couple of years. And every time we became friends, I always went back to drinking again. So she didn't have to believe I was going to drink. And if I become friendly, I would start to drink again. Took 3 years of sobriety before she realized I meant business. Then she came one morning down and said, 3 years later, she said, Johnny, it wasn't always your fault. I said, no, now I can die. Long ago, she said, you know, this life we live today is really the most fabulous adventure. And it was so hopeless and so tragic it has completely turned around. There's even a degree of innocence between us today. And that's almost impossible to believe, but that's come to pass because she's just as busy in Al-Anon as I'm in AA. And we have seen so many people over the years have turned around and started to be good to one another. And there was a time when I said to her, you know, that maybe sobriety won't even work for us. Maybe we hurt each other too much. But I said, why don't you and I try to shape up? You know, we have 4 kids to bring up. Kids need our parents. They need both mother and father. I know, because my dad died when I was little. They need them both. And she got a good sponsor, and I got a good sponsor. And we shaped up. Myrna, her sponsor, said to her one day, Karen, we can't fix the past. You can't fix it. Jon can't fix it. Nobody can fix the past. The only way you can have a better past is to have a better present. And that's what happened here, you know. And I was 7 years sober. We fell in love again. It has been terrific. You know, my age group, we still sleep together. And we don't have a king-size bed, and we are cozy. And we have a wonderful time. She is a writer, and she doing her things, and I work full time, and we love to be together. Tell you how you know, she doesn't have to go on and bug me about my defects of character, and I don't have to straighten her out. I adore them today, and we have fun together. I mean, to tell you how easy it is between us. I was in my late 70s. She stood on, looked at me one day and said, Johnny, if you ask me, I'll run away with you, you know. And it's just that neat, you know. So now the last I'm going to talk about the God business. It's a spiritual meeting. Well, you know, so we pray in the morning and read in the book and so on, but the superintendents called me at 7:15 and so on and interrupt me. So I couldn't. I have a quick prayer. Walter O'Keefe had a long prayer about that was really beautiful. I shortened it up a little bit. And my prayer in the morning is this: God, thank you for being with me today. I know the fact that I'm trying to please you will in fact please you. I will be very busy. I got to go now. But I have locked in. And then in the afternoon, I lived in Laguna. I went down to the beach every day at 4 o'clock and swam for an hour in the ocean. Then I took my 10th and 11th step. And after about 3-4 months, I realized I'm missing out on something. So next day, I took my 10th and 11th step. And next morning, I called my sponsor and I said, this is what I talked to God about yesterday. And I told him when I spoke loudly to Charlie, what I talked to God about, it didn't sound so good as when I talked to God directly. When I heard my own voice, I'm not convinced that I'm 100% right. So then I started to be able to take directions. And one time, the first time I asked him, what would you do in a situation like this? He said, I tried it this way, it didn't work so good. I tried it this way, it worked better. On my instantly, I thought, the way I plan to handle it is a lot more sophisticated. But I tried it his way, and it worked better. What came here was, it wasn't necessary for me anymore to be right all the time. And that was fantastic. You know, that's a freedom in itself. And you know, it's like this. I talk to God through my sponsor. I have no secrets. And there's a line in the big book that says, we are sick as our secrets. There's a new freedom here. And besides this, there's some stuff that I talk to God about that I don't want anybody else to know because I wouldn't come out so good. It's an important thing. So then we wonder here, what is it that's going on in these rooms? You know, Chuck and Elsa, they showed it every time they showed up every day in the meeting. It's called love with no conditions. You and I can be who we are and what we are, and in spite of it, we are loved. There's nothing like it on the face of this earth. And then this ism we have, it makes us belong. We belong to one another. There's a sense of belonging in these rooms that is sometimes haunting. It's a fact and reality. Alone we cannot do it, but together we can. The room, the group, the fellowship will carry us when we can't care for ourselves. It's a beautiful thing. I assure you. You know, I never fitted in out there. I couldn't function out there. If I wasn't the center of attention, I wouldn't even play. I always wished I was somebody else. And thanks to this program, this way of life, you practice these principles and do the deal and help others and carry the message. Something happens to us. We fit in out there. We are part of something. There is some purpose. I'd be so bold to say that many of us that do this deal, we live out there like we don't have the illness. Think about that. Now, this is the #1 kilosecond contributor to insanity. Now, no cure for it. You study to become a doctor, that's what you find out. The only thing that, for me, you can't have a drink a day at a time. But it's incurable disease. That's how serious it is. You know, and you know, so we live out there. Tell that to a guy who have heart and cancer or fatal disease. As far as I'm concerned, you and I, we are no victims. You and I have an opportunity to participate in life and live in place with this program of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. Nobody have the breaks that you and I have. You know, I have this Rolex here. It's 11:15, 12:15. It's an Oyster Perpetual. You know, it's solid gold. You know, you get the president's watch today, you know, the $24,000. It's good for 300 feet under the sea level. This one here is 42 years old, down 1,500 feet. You know, Karen gave it to me when I was 2 years sober. It looks like brand new. Winds itself. You know, I'm telling you this because we can't go overtime in AA. It drives those old timers crazy. I have a friend in Glendale. His name is Bob Lemkin. He's a full-blooded German, and I had a little problem with the Germans during the war. You know, he even talks funny. You know, Bob was born here. He has more of an accent than I have. He practices every night or something. 30 years ago, he was 12 years sober in Glendale on his birthday. Bob is a terrific guy and helped a lot of people and lived the program all these years. But 30 years ago, You know, he sat at the door down, and it was 10 o'clock, and you can't save any souls after 10, you know. And I had a minute and a half to wrap up my story, just like right now. And he sits down and shouts, "John, for God's sakes, it's 10. I said, "Lemke, this is only an AA meeting. We ain't marching into Poland tonight." You know. You all knew. If you can just believe this, we only wish you well and we only want good things for you. If you can just believe that and take that with you, you will never wake up lonely anymore. Because you know by now there's a way to go and to live. It's obvious. So what is this thing that's so important to us? It's called abstinence. Abstinence is a spiritual environment. It isn't natural for alcoholics not to drink. But as long as you and I have abstinence, chance. And we sit in these rooms and we cannot help it, we identify. Right on what Mary said, what Bill said. Why didn't I see it before? This identification, we call it. But there's something that's even deeper than that. You know, well, I've shared this before. How can it be I can sit in the stadium with 84 people and feel alone? What's the matter with me? It's part of the symptom of autism. I feel in all directions. When I feel bad, I feel bad. And when I feel good, I feel I'm better than Jesus Christ. Nothing in between. And then we go here and we do the deal. And then one day I woke up and I took my 10th step and I realized I am just like they are just like I am. And if they can do it, I can do it. I'm part of something for the first time in my life. Just as tough and hard for them as it is for me. But I'm part of something instead of being different. And that's what you and I fight on to justify what we want to do, you know. It's just as hard for them as it is for me. So, okay. So then there's deeper than that. It's called moments of clarity. Moments of clarity. I took my 10th and 11th step and I said, why was I so lucky that I saw and grabbed and ran with it? My brothers, they need it as much as I did. The 12th step over there, they don't want to. Incredible. So then we come, this committee up there at times that goes on. I don't want to go to a meeting tonight. What's the matter with you? Are you that sick that you have to go to a meeting 5 times a week? What the hell is the matter with you? Still, it's the only thing there is that's worked. I know it because I've seen it. I come to that meeting that night, and why I hear here, and I say, if that God I was here, I think if I hadn't been missed out on it, God, I was here. So, more clarity. Love. Karen is a writer. She wrote in one of her stories, to be loved is surely a state of grace. That's what this is where we are. It's a state of grace. It's a gift of God what's going on here. In the making of an island. That's the music in AA. You all knew, do this what we do. Don't drink. It's the best deal in town. Thank you.
All right.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.